My name is Amelia, and I'm just a simple woman with a passion for nature's quiet magic. Life has a way of burying secrets in the soil, and sometimes they bloom when you least expect it. It all started after my husband passed away. Grief has a strange way of changing you, making you seek comfort in the most unexpected places. For me, that place was a garden, not my own, but one that belonged to a man named Mr. Bennett. He was 74, soft-spoken but sharp-eyed. His wife had been gone for years, and his house, along with his once stunning garden, had grown quiet, almost lifeless. The first day I saw him, he stood on his patio, watching me with an intensity that made my heart skip. His gaze wasn't predatory, but there was something about the way his eyes followed me that I couldn't ignore. "It used to be her pride and joy," he muttered, almost to himself, as he looked over the wild mess of overgrown vines and wilting flowers. "She'd hate to see it like this." His voice was rough, like someone who'd spent too long in silence. I could feel the weight of his loss in those words, but something inside me stirred. Maybe it was the way he looked at that dying garden, like it was a reflection of his own heart. I'd been there before, lost, broken, clinging to anything that still had life in it. So I nodded. "Then we'll bring it back together," I said, giving him a small smile. At first, our interactions were brief. He'd watch me from the patio, sometimes offering a quiet, "thank you," as I packed up for the day. But over time, those quiet moments grew longer. He'd linger a little closer, ask me about the plants I was trimming, and tell me stories about his late wife, Eleanor. "She loved roses," he'd say, his fingers grazing one of the petals like it was sacred. Said they reminded her of love, beautiful, but sharp if you're not careful. His words stayed with me: roses, love, and thorns. It all felt too familiar. I'd lost my husband just 2 years ago, and since then, I'd felt every thorn life had to offer. But something about being in that garden with him started to feel different, like maybe, just maybe, the thorns didn't hurt as much when you weren't facing them alone. One warm afternoon, I was kneeling by the flower beds, wiping the sweat from my brow, when I noticed him watching me. This time, he wasn't on the patio. He was closer, standing just a few feet away, his gaze steady. "You're good at this," he said softly, his eyes meeting mine. "Bringing life back to something that's almost gone." "You have to be gentle," I replied, tilting my head toward him. "If you're too rough, you'll break them, but if you're too soft, they'll never grow strong." I glanced up at him, wiping dirt from my hands. "Kind of like people." His lips quirked into a smile, not a big one, just a hint, but it was the first time I'd seen it. "Is that so, Amelia?" he asked, his voice low, smooth like honey. From then on, things shifted. Our conversations weren't just about plants. We talked about life, love, and the kind of loneliness that creeps in when you're not looking. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the garden, I sat on the old stone bench near the rosebushes. Mr. Bennett came over, sitting beside me without a word. We sat in silence, the kind that's comfortable, not awkward. I glanced at him, and for the first time, I saw something different in his eyes, not just sadness, but longing. I'd seen that look before. I'd felt it too. "Do you ever miss being close to someone?" I asked softly, turning to face him. His eyes flicked to mine, and for a second, I wondered if I'd gone too far, but then he nodded slowly, deliberately. "Every single day," he replied, his voice rough with honesty. His gaze stayed on mine, and for a moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. I don't know what came over me, but I reached for his hand, lacing my fingers with his. His breath hitched, but he didn't pull away. "It's okay to want that," I said, my voice steady. "It's okay to feel." That night, I invited him inside, not for anything wild or reckless, but because sometimes being close to someone is its own kind of healing. He hesitated at the door, his hand resting on the frame as if he might change his mind, but then I smiled and said, "You're welcome here, Mr. Bennett." No expectations, just warmth. He stepped inside, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. We shared tea, stories, and laughter. There were no grand declarations of love, no sweeping confessions, just two people trying to remember what it felt like to be seen and valued. And that night, as I watched him walk away from my door, something inside me shifted too. The next morning, the roses in the garden seemed brighter, the air warmer, the sun a little softer on my skin. Maybe it was just a coincidence, or maybe it was something more. Love doesn't always have to be big and dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as sharing a cup of tea and knowing you're not alone anymore. People think gardens are about beauty, the colors, the flowers, the perfect symmetry of nature's design, but they're wrong. Gardens are about patience, resilience, and finding a way to bloom again after the storm. Mr. Bennett and we're just two people learning to bloom again. Sometimes, life leads us to places we never expected. We think we're tending to a garden, but in reality, we're tending to each other. What started as a chance to bring life back to a forgotten place became something much more, a reminder that no matter how tangled the roots, something beautiful can still grow.